everybody,
Buongiorno.
and welcome, buongiorno, and welcome to the Tavola Aperta open table with Peter Miller today. His artwork is not here, maybe you already seen it. It's in the Arsenale, in the Pavilion of Color, and it's one of the last room of the Pavilion of Color. His film is about a theme very close to the discussion we had yesterday about making the visible invisible, and it's a part of, I think, a larger interest of Peter in his artwork research field. So, shall you introduce your artwork, even for those that haven't seen it yet?
Should I? Sure.
Please.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. My name is Peter Miller. Thank you so very much for coming to this Tavola Aperta and dining this afternoon. Please start eating. The peaches look great. Don't,
As soon as somebody brings something to eat.
Yeah, the film I'm showing is a 16mm film. The title is Stained Glass. If you saw it, it's at the end of the large, long Cordillere. And before you get to the last room, it's kind of in a cave with a broken open entrance, and inside there's a large 16mm projector going and projecting a ball of light, colored light on the wall, and there's sound as well. It's part of the Pavilion of Color. That pavilion used to be called the Pavilion of Color and Mystical Joy, but at the last minute it was just changed to the Pavilion of Color, which was kind of too bad because I think Mystical Joy is something that's worth thinking is cool. And like I said, I'm not sure if everybody here saw that film, so I don't know how much to talk about it in great detail. But it's in the film projection, the projector doesn't have a lens, so removing the lens from the projector is a gesture that one would think would result in an image that is then, not that there wouldn't be much to see. But on the contrary, there actually is a lot to see. The things you end up seeing are not things that you're accustomed to seeing. So by removing the lens, there's no longer a focused image on the wall. There's no longer a framed square, things that the cinema or Western art in general require. But in its place, there's this pulsating black orb. And that orb is the shadow of the lamp inside the lamp house of the projector. So the projector is functioning more like a pinhole projector. I don't know if anybody here knows what a pinhole camera is, but it would be the same kind of thing, where the projector is given a chance to kind of turn itself inside out. And what you end up seeing is the motion that one sees is the heat coming off of the light bulb. So there's these undulating patterns of color and light and sound. That's pretty much as much. I can go on and on about it. Has anybody here seen the piece and would like to talk about it? Oh, yeah? Because I also feel like it's in artwork in general, but also with this piece in particular, I don't think it works greatly to my advantage to tell you what I think you should experience when you see it. Because, that would be great, right? If I just had like a set of instructions and I could say, go in, think this, feel this, change yourself in this manner, and then leave a better person, which is really what I hope an artwork I aspire to. I hope that artworks can do that, but I think it's a little reductive to think that I can reveal all that to you. I don't know if you have any particular questions or anything. I'm putting you on the spot a bit, but sorry.
Maybe just
it is a Tavola Aperta. Anybody?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, anybody feel free to talk or ask questions. Or
just a reflection. I really like the texture. I really was going in there and I felt the damp of the stone and the sound of the projector, and I was completely kind of moved into a different time zone. And I think that was really powerful.
Yeah, thanks. The room itself, if you haven't seen it, is different than most of the other rooms. It's not a white cube by any means. When I walked into the room for the first time, I felt like there had been a wall there, and somebody had taken a sledgehammer to the wall and just cracked it open, and there had been like this hidden artwork that had been sitting there all the while that was just going and going and going. After I installed the piece, that was what I was trying to aim for, was this feeling that you just sort of find this thing in this troll space. I say troll space because in mythology, I don't know if you all know about trolls, but yeah. Trolls are, mythologically, trolls live between two things. So we always think of trolls as living under bridges, but trolls can also live in doorways. I'm not trying to say the piece itself is a troll, but this liminal, this idea that it's neither, it can't be on that side of the river, it can't be on that side of the river. It has to always stay between two things, or inside of a doorway or outside of a doorway. And so the piece, I think, also, for me, fluctuates between something that I I could clearly understand, and I couldn't quite understand, and I have to sort of vacillate in that space of thinking about it and offering it some of myself, and it offering me some of itself, and me trying to meet it at its halfway, so to speak. I don't know if that...
I think that even the possibility of seeing different things in the film itself. Yesterday you told me, try to just relax and fix just one point and watch just one point, and you know, without giving me any, of course, key to watch the film. And it's true that if you watch it really relaxing from the beginning to the end, and even the music. Did you compose yourself?
No, a friend of mine, Toby Driver, composed the music, and I'd love to talk about that as well. What Marie is saying is we met briefly yesterday to look at the piece, and in a fantastic show, like this one is, durational works, you know, there's videos or films that have a duration are they're more challenging, because if a piece says I'm 10 minutes long, the viewer has to immediately negotiate, do I have these 10 minutes, you know? And because a lot of us are on the run and and I completely understand that, those are the conditions of an exhibition like this. I understand that a lot of people won't be able to take the time for whatever reason, and that's a decision that they're, of course, able to make. But I asked Maria to look at the piece and not to try and kind of preconceptualize what her response might be. There's a lot of, it's in the pavilion of color, so it is a very colorful piece, and I asked her to just relax and look at it, and also try to fix her gaze somewhere, because as you were saying, the projection takes place on a wall, not on a screen, but on a kind of crumbling wall that's there. So there's very little that I added to the room. It's just the projector and some seats. I thought that adding anything to the room would have made it feel stranger, or would have made it act like it's something it's not. And since the piece itself is, I believe, not trying to be anything it's not, it's just trying to be sincerely the thing it is, I thought leaving the room the way it was would be the best decision. So I think that the time, you know, the piece occupies time, and that's always going to be an issue of some sorts, you know. But if you take the time to look at it, I think it can do certain things that it wouldn't do if one doesn't take the time to look at it.
Yes, it's completely different, I think, to take your time for the... It's true that there's a lot of film and videos, but it's even true that 10 minutes is not so long. But you can have, I think, that you can have really a different experience from the beginning to the end, thanks to the music and thanks to the colors that change, and to the fact that it seems really like a chimera. It was like, for me, it takes me really thinking about different things in the 10 minutes. So
yeah. To add to that quickly, I think you have to understand, I come out of a practice that's based a lot in experimental filmmaking, or questioning what cinema could be, what time-based... Please, everyone start eating, by the way. I'm just going to keep talking. But so, if I take a step back and back and back on that, cinema is a relatively new invention. Moving images, which we now, or everybody at this table probably has the capacity of recording on the fly, that's something that's still a very, very young technology and a very young art form. And as an art form, in the last 140 years or so, 30 years, there hasn't been a lot of, there's been so many, it's a medium that's indivorcible from this industry. So there is this Hollywood thing. So a lot of the films we see, even films that are very creative or artful, still feature things like humans occupying landscapes and trying to solve problems, which is kind of a lot of Hollywood films. And I'm of the impression that cinema as an art form still has a tremendous amount of untapped, there's still a lot of things that haven't been done with film. I feel like painting has had a chance to really, really explore its inner self in a way that maybe the cinema or photography have not. So there's a history in experimental filmmaking of structural or conceptual films that also sort of deny a cinema goer the sort of arc they expect. So instead of seeing a film where you think, okay, I know how long this is going to take, and it's going to offer me information in the future, which will then help make sense of what happened in the past. And that's a common trope in cinema as well. And so by taking that away, and just, there's a moment where I'm hoping that the audience kind of is exhausted of that expectation, and is no longer thinking, this film is going to give me this one thing that I know it's going to give me, or I want it to give me. But by exhausting the audience of that, it can do something else. by having, but it takes a while to remove that. So it's more like, instead of it being like a 10-minute arc, it's more like a suspended present, if you can imagine that. So it kind of holds you in this moment of never actually getting to the place you think you might go to, but also never, but also being in that present moment that's gliding into the future and creating a past behind it, but always trying to just be in that moment kind of thing. Did you have a question, by the way?
Yes, I wanted to ask you regarding the pinhole of this pinhole camera. Is it something that comes from the camera oscura? This the first form of
Yeah.
cameras without lens.
Exactly. So you know, if you go back,
the Carlevaris
yeah.
one.
Yeah, little cinema history lecture here. My favorite time period of the cinema is what they call the proto-cinema. So it's approximately the 10,000 years that ended in 1898 with the invention of the cinema. So if you go back, the Egyptians, the hieroglyphics, if you look back, Della Porta, the Neapolitan physicist, Athenaeus Kircher, we're all, Alhazen, we're all looking at camera obscuras. The camera obscura is basically any closed box with a hole in it, and if there's light outside, it comes through that hole, turns upside down, and it goes onto the wall. David Hockney has written lots of books about the fact that probably the history of painting is far more indebted to the camera obscura than people are willing to admit, because a lot of paintings feature optical aberrations or things that wouldn't have existed if a human observed it, but if you're trying to trace a painting, it would. So that's the camera obscura. Roland Barthes' book, Camera Lucida, the bright room, the dark room. Camera, Italian for room. Here, it's sort of the opposite. I was thinking of this metaphor earlier. There's this famous experiment by Isaac Newton that we all know about, where white light, sunlight came into a dark room. He held up a prism, and it scattered or shattered into a rainbow, which is also kind of features in the film a little bit. And that experiment from him was a way of proving that white light was actually composed of various wavelengths of light, and he was right. It's a famous experiment. In that experiment is also kind of a cinema experiment. In order to do that experiment, he has to create a dark chamber. He has to let light project into the room, and he has to then project it onto a screen to see it. So he's kind of forming a weird scientific cinema there. The subject of his experiment is not the subject on the screen. He's not looking at the rainbow and saying, "See, I made a rainbow." The subject of his experiment is the sun. He's saying, "See, white light is composed of these different things." I'm using that as a kind of a shifting point to get from the camera obscura to this projector obscura, pinhole projector idea, where in this installation, the projector, because there's no lens, the small point in front of the lamp house is serving to invert the contents of the lamp house. So the subject on the wall, the things that we're seeing, are all the interior parts of the cinema that are normally not visible. So the cinema is the projector itself is giving us a chance to show its insides, turn them inside out, so to speak. And rather than see nothing, we see a lot more than we would think. For instance, there's this black orb, which is the shadow of the lamp, the shadow of a light, which I think is a funny idea anyway. There's a cord feeding it electrically. I can suggest some interpretations here. When I see it, I think of things like the optical nerve that feeds my eye and whose blind spot is, as you all know, we have blind spots here and here that we can't see. You know that, right? Like, we're all looking around right now, but there's a huge gaping hole in your vision right here, and your brain is constantly filling that with information so you don't go crazy. And that's the point where the optical nerve enters the back of the retina. So I can see those kinds of things, but I don't want to be prescriptive and say if you're not seeing that, you're not getting it, because it's really not a getting thing. It's not, as I was saying to a friend yesterday, it's not about something, it just is something. And I think somebody else wrote something about black hole theory, that there's this center that absorbs all the light, that sucks it all in, which we all seem to know more and more about nowadays, black holes, even though, we've never met them personally.
Yeah, you can see it.
But that's what I mean about the projector, pinhole projector.
Did you experiment a lot with different sizes of these?
Yeah, I mean, I try to avoid questions of experimenting a lot because of the implication of like professionalism or not. But I can tell you I worked very, very carefully to get the piece to look the way that it did, and yeah. By the way, we don't have to. I also want to know. I talked to Marie about this yesterday. I can't wait to hear what you're going to say. But I just want to let everyone know this is a Tavola Aperta. This doesn't have to be an interview. It's not a question and answer thing. I don't have all the answers. I would love things don't have to take the shape of a question. We can talk about anything except politics. We can talk about, we can tell jokes. We can talk about it. I mean, there's nothing is off the table, so to speak. I wouldn't consider this a failure if I don't get to say one thing, and I would consider it a success if we all relax, eat, and just share. Just want to get that out there. Please.
No, so that's good really now, because I don't really have a question, a proper
Sweet.
question.
Good
I don't
timing.
have that, and it's probably forming at this moment in my mind slowly. I actually know you from a while ago, but not really well. I think there was a few exhibitions maybe we were together, but that was focused on photography. And I wanted you maybe to back up a bit, because you seem to talk about cinema a lot, but I think your work also revolves around some kind of idea of photography as well. It's not, we can't really detach the two. And then I went on your website a few days ago to just refresh my mind of your work. I didn't see here yet the work, but I was quite happy to see somebody that is like enjoying himself with photography still, or like has a kind of sense of humor, and you seem optimistic in an age where I can't find a good reason why to keep on photographing or trying to really understand the value of photography these days. Photography as an art form, let's say, not as a vernacular kind of form. And well, it's not really a question.
Oh, fantastic, though.
But then how do you keep it up? Maybe would be my question. Like, how do you find meaning, essence, drive related to photography? More cinema I can understand because it's moving. It kind of allows itself to keep on moving. Photography is more static, and I think you're still commenting on photography as well. It's not just a cinematic practice, I think.
I wish I'd written that all down. You said like 7 things that are fantastic.
How do you, or what do you think, or how do you see photography, just photography, try to separate photography from cinema at the moment? Is there a value in photography? How do you treat it as an art form nowadays?
Absolutely. I would share your question. I would add to your question by saying, how does an artist today work in photography or moving images in a day and age when pretty much most people have access to incredible quality of image making? I say most people because obviously I'm not going to talk about the whole world, but you have to understand that just like 10 or 20 years ago, the number of people on the planet who had access to movie making or image making quality devices like a lot of us have in our pockets right now was very small. There's like maybe thousands of people in the world had access to that kind of equipment. So one of the ways I phrase your question is, how, as an artist, how do you work how do you work as an artist with film or photography in an age where everybody is a photographer and everybody is a filmmaker? You don't even need to print out a card to say it. You can just we are it. So that's a very good question. Another question, which I was surprised to see, I felt like you phrased the first half of it, which is, I phrased it thusly: how do you find what you don't know you're looking for? Which is a kind of a driving question in my practice, and it's intentionally absurdly phrased. But how do you find what you don't know you're looking for? What are the paths you can take in an artist practice to try to, I don't want to use the term stumble upon, but really to discover things that turn your motor over, that get you amped. There's this term radical, which is in theory is used a lot to talk about radical action or radical thought. But when I was growing up, radical just meant cosmic. Like if something was radical, it just really got you going. It just made you want to, And in music, there's a lot of parallels, I think, also is about what can happen in music today and what is it that gets people to make music. It's hard for me to talk about photography and cinema as separate things. But I will. I wanted to share a quick anecdote with everybody at the table right now, also, just to help if you don't know my practice. And it's not because I think you need to know my practice, but because this fantastic Biennale is about artist practices, which I think is a really courageous thing to do right now. One way of understanding my practice is when I was a boy, when I was about 8 years old, I was really, really into magic. And when I say magic, I mean like card tricks and coin tricks. And I read all the books. I When I was on the road with my family or something, I would make sure we went to a magic shop because I had to get them. I would practice all of my illusions. I intentionally called them illusions instead of tricks. I practiced all my illusions in front of a mirror as often as I had to until I'd mastered them, and then I would perform them for my brother and my sister, and then slowly I would perform them for my friends. And then, after I felt confident enough, I would perform them for adults. And when I performed an illusion for an adult, I found immediately I was always met with one of the same two responses. How did you do that? And do it again. And the two rules of magic, as everyone knows, is you cannot reveal and you cannot repeat an illusion. And as a child, I would try to play with them and say, I don't know how it worked. Wasn't it amazing? Isn't it just amazing? Isn't it wonderful? And so it was at that age that I felt like I learned the separation between illusion and deception, that my friends were young enough to have the imagination to think that was just wonderful. But adults had become maybe cynical enough to think that was deception. This young boy is trying to pull one over on me. So I hung it up. I actually stopped performing illusions until I later discovered film and photography. Because film and photography are art forms which are not just founded on illusions and by illusionists, but they are art forms in which you can reveal and you can repeat the illusion without breaking any kind of rule. So a lot of the works that you might be talking about are works where what really gets me into them is the idea that I can show people exactly how wonderful this world is. I know that sentence sounds really out of touch, but I can share this sort of excitement with an experience and tell them why and show them again and again, you know? So that's kind of a point of entry I have. And when I say, by the way, that film and photography was founded on illusions and by illusionists, I'm not making that up. Like the history of cinema, the Lumiere brothers invented the cinematograph, and within 5 years, not just Méliès, but magicians all over the world who were on tour were renting these equipment and showing them. You would go in the turn of the century, you would go to a show, and a magician would saw a lady in half and then say, and now, a cinema projection. And it was part of that same vaudevillian kind of thing. And same with photography. If you look at the history of photography, the first 100 years, you know, not just spirit photography, but there's lots of things there that are based in magic. So that's one of my interests. I really wish I'd written down the 7 things that you said, but I think the other question is how do you, I think the artist practice thing is a very important, I would love to talk about artist practice here, and we could all talk about how we practice whatever we do in our own lives. I think practice is a great word too, because like you're saying, it's hard. It's really, really difficult, you know? And I'm often fond of saying that a magician has a practice. You're a practicing magician. I'm not a practicing magician. I'm a practicing artist. A doctor has a practice, a practicing doctor, which means that you actually have to practice. You can't just be like, okay, I'm a doctor, and now I don't have to learn anything else. I'll just be a doctor forever, and I can always do this thing. You have to every day practice, you know? And what... No, even magicians, because those...
But unless you're an artist as magician or a magician as artist, and then...
That would be sorcery. There's still a lot of practice.
Take a minimal artist. They're not doing much, you know, or artists that are commenting on the labor today, or they don't work, you know. You have the resisting to work thing. That's also become an artistic concept, and you have exhibitions about not working or being lazy or sleeping. And they're artistic in a way. They are practicing an art form that is non-existing or not.
They're not you, though. That's the good news, right? They're not me. I mean, the curatorial statement for the show, one of the things I really liked about it, and I was talking to my friend Chris about this yesterday, is this word otium, which I'd not ever heard before. Otium. Yeah. I'd never heard it before. I looked it up, and in English, you can translate otium, O-T-I-U-M, as... Oh, thank you. How embarrassing.
Because it's Latin.
Can we go back a minute and delete me mispronouncing a very important word?
No, because it's otium, which is Latin.
Okay, so everyone knows this.
The T in Latin is spelled.
All right. Sorry. Wrong country to be making that mistake. Yeah, otium.
But you can speak lots of languages apart from Latin. It's okay.
Yeah. Anyway, I was trying to stress the spelling there and the pronunciation, but I did a bad thing. But it translates, otium, translates into English as both leisure time, and idleness, which in English, those are very different things. Yeah. If somebody is idle, they're not doing the thing they should be doing. If someone's engaging in leisure, they are doing the thing they should be doing in that moment because it's based on another thing. So I'm left with the only possible conclusion, which is that it's really not very well translated into English, because you can't mean both of those things at the same time. But I think what the curator means by that is that there's a tremendous amount of what I do on a daily basis probably looks to other people like not very serious, you know? Except this, I'm wearing a microphone, and this looks very serious, but this is a rare exception.
You know, in Latin, otium was really the practice of being in a state, even without doing something specific, but that leads you in creating something more profound and concrete. So it's a standby state, let's say, maybe, which is not really acting, but it's not laziness as we can conceive it.
Right.
Sorry.
Not passive, receptive.
Yes. Yeah.
So, I also don't know if there's one single term in English that means all of that, but I really appreciated that when I read that, because I realized there's also, I just want to reference really quickly, there's an essay, a very short essay by Roland Barthes called The Writer on Holiday, and I always call it The Artist on Holiday, and it's like required reading. Whenever I make students read it, and if the students are photographers, I scratch out writer and write photographer. If they're filmmakers, I scratch out writer and write filmmaker. But he's observing this writer, André Gide, on a vacation, and Bart sees this newspaper, and there's a photograph of the writer André Gide on vacation on a ship. And Bart's analyzing the photograph, and he's like, do we really think when he's on vacation that he's sitting there in the ship looking out and not thinking about the next book he's going to read? Can he turn that off, you know? Can he possibly? And he said that that's a rare attribute. And he reserved that attribute for priests and kings as well. That's not me, I'm Bart saying that. He says a priest doesn't turn it off.
Yeah.
You know, on Sunday, well, I mean, that's a bad example. On Monday, a priest doesn't be like, isn't it like, okay, I can take the collar off. They're permanently that thing. And a king, you know, even in, these are Bart's words, on the toilet is still the king, you know? You cannot turn that off. And I like the fact, I mean, obviously, what artist wouldn't like the fact that they're being included in that kind of archetypal tarot deck, but it doesn't turn off. So I'm fond of telling people, when I go to the post office and I have something I want to mail and I get into the post office and there's a long line of like 25 people, that used to be the thing that would get my blood boiling. I would start to get really frustrated because everything was so slow, and I would just think, these are 25 minutes of my life that I'm going to waste. And now, when I get to the post office and I have the package and I see the line, I just relax and I think, okay, I'm going to be here for 25 minutes. I can't move if I want to mail this. I'm not going to get out of line. And then I just relax, and that's part of my studio practice. And while I'm standing in that line, and my body is no longer of use to me. I can't make it go faster. I can't make it go forward or backward. I've given that up. Something else happens, and I get a lot of work done in the line at the post office now, which is also why I mail a lot of things, or when shopping. So those little things like that are also part of the studio practice for me. I don't think of my studio as something that I just clock into at 9 in the morning on Monday and sit down and start working. You know. And also, I think that there's something to be said for, I don't want to say the word muse, but the older I get, the more and more difficult it is to trust that whisper that comes to me that says, you should do this thing, it's a valid thing for you to do with your time and money. I don't even think about the fact as to whether or not people will then enjoy it, or if it'll lead to something or anything like that. It's just alone that I feel like works of art come to tap me on the shoulder sometime, and they just, hey, can you make me? And I think that happens to, I hope it happens to all of us, but there's no good reason to do it. There's no good reason to do it. And nobody I know would look at me and say, it's great that you're doing that thing that you're doing. But the more and more I do it, and the more and more I trust it, and the less I doubt it, because that whisper gets quieter and quieter every day, you know? The more and more I trust it and fall through with it, more I feel like there's something else that I'm not carrying around, you know? So, I don't know if that's a...
It's okay.
Rana? Oh, sorry. Hey, no sweat.
There's just so much you said that it moved me, really, right there, that I just want a response. I don't know, just to chat about it.
I think you need another mic.
Are you hearing me?
I mean, I hear you, but
Hello? Is that right? No?
just try to...
Yeah.
this.
How about,
Yeah.
oh, that sounds... Hello?
Green's not working.
So good.
Yeah. Hi, Rana.
Hi. Hi.
By the way, Rana and I met on a Vaporetto coming from the airport 2 days ago
Yeah.
with Chris, so... That-
So, hi. There were just so many things. You said first, you were talking about the film, because I haven't seen it. And I've noticed a little bit since I've been here a whole 2 days and gone around the city a little bit and seen some of the art and the other collateral exhibitions, there's a lot of film, and I love the needing to stop and spending time. And one of the things I saw that moved me a lot and reminds me of, you gave words to what my experience was there, was a show called Man as Bird.
Yeah.
Do you know that? It's right near the
Palazzo Vanaxel.
Miracoli.
Miracoli, in front
Yeah.
of the Church of Miracoli. Yes, the Palazzo Vanaxel.
And there's a film up there upstairs, and it's mesmerizing. It's actually, it does have representation. It's trees and stuff. But it had this sense, I had the sense of, oh, I'm being taken on a journey. Oh, I think it's called Journeys. There's a story unraveling. And it kept, it's what you said, it kept, like it was sort of suspending I was waiting for the narrative, and it never happened. And finally, at a certain point, I let it go and realized, oh, this isn't happening. This is the now. This is the ongoing now that you were just describing. It was very moving, actually. I found it really powerful. So there's that. That's just touching me. But then there's this word practice that you're using that I love, which is the same thing, I actually think. It feels like a meditation practice to me, what you do in the post office. And what came to my mind when you said, you know, the doctor practice, the artist practice, is a meditation practice, which I have. And what you do is you sort of give up the journey of getting to the stamps, and you go, I'm here. This is the event. This is the event now, standing here.
Yeah.
And then something happens. So I love that, and I think that it's such an alternate way to proceed in the world, and it is what a lot of the films are offering, if we will sit. They might, you know. So
They might
anyway,
not.
I don't know. And it comes back to, if there is a question in this at the end, I could just talk to you because I think it's all really interesting. But it is the little riff you threw off at the beginning that you said, oh, they lost the phrase mystical joy. And I like that because I love that phrase. So if you want, could you riff a little bit on what that phrase does for you?
On mystical joy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it just feels resonant here in this moment to me. So.
Yeah.
And you don't have to right now if you want to just like have a drink, another drink.
Is that okay?
Come back.
I'll digest that.
Say, hey, I have something about mystical joy for you.
Yeah.
I'll speak while you have your Yeah, it's on. It's on? Okay. So exactly what you were saying, I was totally feeling that too, and it's interesting that when you said what you do in a lineup is very much what a meditator would do, to just accept the present moment and watch your mind and your reactions. And that's how I felt when I spent the 10 minutes sitting there. And it felt a bit like, I loved the sort of anachronistic feel of the room with the projector, and I immediately just calmed down. I knew I wasn't going to see any kind of narrative play out. Although after, you know, hearing that tick, 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 and the wonderful music, and I could feel my mind calm down, and then these archetypal images or my own contribution to it, as like a sunset or the heat rising off water in the air, or all of that started drifting through my mind, and the eyeball, and it was interesting, all these very archetypal kind of calming energy that I felt in there, which was really, really great. Yeah, I enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you very much.
Especially, you know, with the rapid pace of the first few days of being here and all the information you take in. It was a really nice kind of antidote.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, about that piece, one other thing that you just reminded me of, and this is going to sound maybe a little highfalutin, but after making the piece, I came upon an essay which is a transcription of a lecture that Marcel Duchamp, hence the highfalutinness, gave in 1961 to the Philadelphia College of Art. And in it, it's called Where Do We Go From Here? 1961, still a good question. And in it, he talks about the history of representational, we just talked about with the trees, and non-representational, like abstract artwork, and how that's kind of what we've been left with. And not that like I said, I read this after making the piece, but there's a paragraph in there that really stuck out to me, which is that he postulates then in 1961 that in the future artists will have to abandon this dichotomy of representational or non-representational, and they will have to, like Alice, go through the looking glass to the other side of the retina, he says. And that, when I read that, I was like, that's great, right? Like, what happens if what would be on the other side of that, you know? And the last sentence in the book, in the very, very short transcription, is also, the artists of the future will go underground, which I'm also feeling because there's a tremendous amount of pressure as an artist working today to make work that fits into a certain kind of thesis that's being written by somebody who's studying art history right now, which maybe is a little bit of what you were talking about earlier. It's a great time to be an artist because there's never been more talented artists in the world. It's also a difficult time because there's never been more talented artists in the world. But I really enjoyed that idea of passing beyond the retina and what would be there. And I think that that gesture of removing the lens from the projector, as simplistic as it might sound, is sort of this way of saying, what happens if let me put it this way, everything we experience is through some form of apparatus. Either it's through the lenses of our eyeballs right now, or the language. I'm speaking English. I'm a Native American. I'm a native-born American. Can we delete that too? I speak German and French. It's not as good as my English, but I have an advantage here at Tavola Aperta at the Biennale because this is supposed to take place in English. So this apparatus, my language, is something that I'm actually well equipped with at this particular moment. Then there's etiquette, right? Like, are we allowed to eat? What can we eat? You know, can I eat while I'm talking to you? So there's all these various apparatuses that are constantly around us. And the film, I think, is a kind of a way of saying, what would happen if we didn't have it? What would you see if you could take a step back from seeing and look at it without your eyes, so to speak?
Well, and you also have, when I was sitting there, because the seats are on the side.
Ice cream cone.
When I was was it on?
Yeah. Yeah.
When I was sitting there, because you've put the benches on the side of the room and not directly in front of the projector, you see that projector is a presence, like a sculptural element in the piece. It's not just a purely cinematic experience.
It's true.
So I was really aware of that too. So it kept taking me out of that sort of hypnotic, cinematic movement, minimal movement, and into the presence of the projector as a sculptural piece.
Yeah.
And also, I was sort of looking at it from a side. I wasn't right in front of that, and that had a different kind of, I'm not sure what that did, but I think it gave me a second sort of awareness of where I was sitting and situated in the piece.
It makes it feel less cinematic, I think.
I think so, yeah.
Sorry.
Please, microphone.
When you're talking about the apparatus and the fact that you're born in the US and that you speak English, where does the layer of privilege come into those sorts of conversations that you have? So that, when you talk about the retina, everyone has retina, but not everyone has the privilege to be able to look into practice in that way. And when you're looking at, I guess, this environment, or the fact that I'm from Australia and I've been able to come here to look at art, when we're looking at art and we're looking at practice, how privilege fits into that, and the way that affects the sort of voices that are heard and the sort of lenses that are encountered, I guess.
Yeah. I don't think everybody has a retina. It's worth pointing out. So it's hard to talk. I mean, it's not. I'm not obviously trying to speak on behalf of everybody or anybody, except myself, in a lot of ways. I understand that there is, privilege plays a huge role, and I mean, in a show like this, in a person like me, in a world like today. If I could tie that back into that whisper thing, I am concerned that there's so many filters that keep that whisper. I'm trying very carefully to listen to the works as they come to me, so to speak. But I'm not trying to pack the works with any kind of information per se. And yeah, it's a thought that plays a big role. I'm also, I live in Germany since 2008. I lived in Vienna before then. I lived in Paris for a little while. So I'm part of also this generation of artists that are listless, so to speak. And that's not all because of American politics and not wanting to be in the U.S. It's maybe something else, some kind of driving vagabond kind of force that keeps people moving around. But there's something about belongingness too, and an inability to stand still that shows up there, I'm pretty sure. But then again, it's not a practice that I feel like I feel like a practice that I'm following and not a practice that I'm leading, maybe. But I don't know if I.
Yeah, I guess I was interested in a wider picture rather than necessarily drilling down into your practice or your person in particular, and maybe opening up that conversation about the fact that as someone who's able to be a vagabond, as someone who's able to sort of go into different cultures, and when we're in a time where, and I know that this exhibition sort of covers some of that, you know, refugees and the idea that I can come to Venice and feel like I can afford to be here, and you know, whereas this isn't something that's available. Or like being a practicing artist as well, you can afford to be a practicing artist when you come from a place of privilege, and the economic investment in being able to make practice, and how that actually translates into the sort of voices that we hear, because they're the sort of voices that are able to make work. So I'm I guess interested in a wider context, and in this context generally, about maybe your thoughts in being included in such a big show, and your that ability to live in Germany and live in different spots, and how that maybe influences your practice or influences your ideas around being a practitioner in today.
Yeah. No, I just received my 3-year visa about a month ago in Germany, and I was nervous because up until then I wasn't sure whether or not I'd get it. But I see what you're saying. When I go to get my 3-year visa, I'm walking in as a person who looks like myself and is speaking very, very, very good German. I would dare say even fluent German. So people are telling me maybe I shouldn't be so nervous, you know. But on the other hand, I'm also thinking, you know, my country has let in maybe 1,000 refugees, and Germany's let in a million. And so why am I taking a place that should be there for someone else, so to speak? Yeah, these are all questions that are part of, I think, most of our everyday. A show like this, I don't know. This is it's a strange. I mean, the art world itself is a strange and absurd place. And actually, speaking of black holes, which I'm sorry to point at you, but there was talk about this film having this black hole in the center of it, and I think there's kind of a metaphorical similarity there to the art world, which is that astrophysically speaking, we know that black holes exist. And but if we got the closer we get to the center of them, the less likely you are to escape it. And I think there's a lot of pressure on artists in the art world to try and maneuver themselves and fit into a certain kind of path that will get them closer and closer to the center of the art world. And to get there, you're supposed to be a shooting star. I'm like trying to support my astrophysicist theory of like contemporary art practice. But as we know from black holes, if you do make it to the center, you never escape. So there's also this kind of thing about the art world, which is that we're all sort of morbidly I'll speak for myself. Morbidly curious about it, but the closer and closer I get to what I perceive to be its center, the more and more horrified I am of it. But it's a world that is, it's not the artist's world, right? It's the art world. And I think it's really frustrating that artists, let's say they were, in the same Duchamp article, he talks about what would happen if artists just unionized and obliterated their name, which some groups have tried, you know, and that for like the next movement after postmodernism, just a huge amount of humans made a bunch of work and they didn't have a name attached to it whatsoever. I mean, the end of the essay is the artists of the future will go underground. I think I have a very difficult time with all of that, thinking about that. I don't think I will ever be in a show like this again, and I have to find a way to keep my practice going without thinking that the world is any different. I totally agree with you. This is Disney World, you know? I mean, this is like a fictional, I don't have dinners, I don't have lunches like this all the time, and next week I'll go back to my studio and, you know, sleep on the floor and make a tuna salad or whatever. I'm trying to keep this world at bay, so to speak. I don't know if I... yeah.
It's just interesting to get your...
It's a huge deal. And there's another question, too. I don't know if you were going in this direction, but like politically, what do you... I feel this real kind of impotence as an artist in terms of politics right now, because although I think that... I feel like there's a pressure on artists right now also to be making work that would be politically addressing the world, and yet a lot of artists I know are seeing the work that's being made, which is trying to politically address the world, as not being part of a solution. So there's also this kind of question, which is like, is what I'm doing really, can I really tell you that it's measurably leading towards some kind of positive outcome? And I can't. And yet I choose to trust that, despite that, because I think there's some kind of, I think that alone is a kind of a political action. I think the artist sits at the table, not this table especially, but when I sit at like a Thanksgiving table in the U.S., which I haven't done in a long time, and I'm one of the archetypes at the table that represent a kind of a way of thinking or a way of living. There's a demonstrability or permissibility, which are, you know, just fancier sounding words for me being able to, or artists being able to exert through a certain lifestyle or a certain thought style another way of living to people, which is, I think, in and of itself a very generous gesture. But I don't know, these are things I think about. But my process is also, my practice is probably also not really, I'm not setting out to achieve certain goals. I'm worried that if I did that, I would start to, my work would become cyclical or concretized in a certain kind of way. Yeah, Robert?
I'm trying. There's so many things that are touching me, and something you're saying about like awareness of privilege, and what do you do with that? And the fellow who was here who left, his question to you, or his reflection about your work being not being pessimistic. He brought the word pessimism, which I thought was so interesting, and it's such a word that feels ripe in the world. Like, you know, that if you have this awareness, how could you not be like, how could that not filter in? And I think sometimes it filters in, and then people close down around their practice because they think they should be doing work about X because X is so oppressive. But it actually cuts out a big, huge amount of who you are. And my own experience of the way that I practice politics is presence. I think it is what you're saying about the Thanksgiving table, is showing up somehow and saying whatever you have to say, and it's an offering that is going to be different. And the other thing, forgive me, I just keep riffing off of these things because they're just bouncing in my head, so please respond, but if there's anything that touches you. But the other thing that I was thinking was, you said, how do you find what you don't know that you're looking for? And you actually seem to have answered the question a few times when you said, it whispers in your ear. It actually finds you, if you're listening.
Yeah.
And that includes, I guess, those questions, which I find hard to look at straight on, those kind of questions of privilege. When I look at them straight on, it feels like I'm staring at the sun, but they end up coming into the tapping, like, if I can shut up long enough, the Emily Dickinson line, tell all the truth, but tell it slant, it will come.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of that is also in relationship to power, which I have a huge issue with. I have a problem bearing the gauntlet of power, and I've never seen power used well in the art world. I've never seen it. Well, I can't say that, but I don't desire any power. So also being in a show like this is uncomfortable for me. I've told people too, like, maybe this was just me, but I didn't meet any artists building up the show. I was here for 3 weeks, and I thought I'd like meet some people, but I also realized that I don't know how to have that conversation, and I didn't want to think about it. But it's a problem. I mean, it's not a problem necessarily, but I think, how do you sustain an ethical arts practice as well? And the ethics is a word that can mean a lot of different things, but it's part of that is also power, because you don't want to be taking things from other people. And I'm not in a position to say that my work is something that people have to look at. I'm not insulted if anybody here didn't see the piece. I'm not insulted if somebody says I looked in and it scared me and they walked away. It doesn't bother me whatsoever. I make a lot of works that people don't see. I make works and I put them in boxes. I make works, I sometimes put them in the world, but this idea that I have to like hammer the world with my works and make sure that they're understood and seen is not my MO. And that's a tricky line it's a tricky path, because it's always uncomfortable for me. The artist Stephen, comedian, I can call him an artist, Stephen Wright once said, you know that feeling when you sit back in your chair and you lean too far and you suddenly go like that? He said he feels like that all the time. And I think I know a little bit of what he means. It's very hard to really feel anchored and grounded and relaxed in the world for me. I feel like the question was asked earlier, and I feel like I'm not doing the piece service if I don't talk about Toby Driver, the composer, a little bit, who wrote the soundtrack. And also because we're talking about artist practice, it may be a good chance to include him. First of all, one of the things that I like a lot of things about Toby, but he used to call his music astral. It was one of the adjectives he used to describe it, which I thought was a nice way to get back to mystical joy, but also cosmic and radical, and like what turns your motor over, so to speak. And I just thought I'd tell a quick anecdote, because I don't think any two artists are remotely alike in their practice or in their lives, even if the work they make looks very similar and they get lumped together in a movement, which I think is a dangerous thing as well. But Toby and I met when we were about 18, and we ended up moving to Boston. And we met at a bar there called the Brendan Bean and had a beer one night. And I was telling him about an artist whose work I'd recently seen at a projection in New York, a Viennese filmmaker named Peter Tchaikovsky, whose work I really, really liked. And Toby, I think we were 21 at the time, and Toby had told me about a composer in New York named John Zorn, whose work he really liked. And that night in that bar, over that beer, we sort of made a pact that we would reach out to these as Borges said, we were young enough to have heroes and still want to be like them. So we decided to reach out to these heroes of ours that week and try and see what would come of it. So I'd made a film and I mailed it to Vienna, mail it to Tchaikovsky to see what he would think of it. And Toby had a CD and he mailed it to New York to John Zorn to see what he would think about it. And I got a nice letter back from Tchaikovsky telling me to keep up the good work and a really good analysis of the piece. And he'd projected it and screened it and considered it very thoughtfully. And Toby got a voicemail on his answering machine from John Zorn saying, "Move to New York, I want to sign you to my label." I don't know if you know John Zorn, but so Toby definitely got the A on that one. I didn't give up though, and I did later end up living in Vienna and working with Tchaikovsky. But I'm mentioning that as one of these weird rolls of the dice that ended up. He lives in New York now, and I didn't move back to the U.S. after moving to Vienna to work with Tchaikovsky. So there's this. It's just in the framework of artist practice. It's strange for me to think of how a little conversation like that and a little chance like that or a little movement like that ended up kind of irreparably transforming our worlds. And he's he's also a composer whose work runs the. I'm not just. This isn't just an ad for his music right now, but. A critic once wrote about his music that no sooner does he try out a genre than he masters it and moves on to try something else. And I admire that kind of risk-taking in a practice as well. That he doesn't want to become a metalhead or a rock star or an electronic pop star. He'll try each and every one of those things and then move on as the curiosity, not forcibly, but as the curiosity comes there. Which is, I think, as a musician trying to actually survive and make money off of selling records is a very dangerous decision because your fan bases get confused because they think, but wait, the last record you made was this, and now how can you make that? Or they'll compare it to each thing. And I think artists have the same problem in general too, that there's this pressure to kind of create a sort of predictable output. So I admire him greatly for that, and I think the music is really what guides the piece through the 10 minutes of feelings that one has or can have while there. Feelings of mystical joy. Are we over time, or?
No, absolutely. Absolutely on time. Is this do you want to do? Okay. Is this connected? I read that you wrote and you talk about a sustainable artist practice.
Well, yeah. I mean, the thing is I'm also, I studied in the U.S. and I've been in Europe, mostly in Vienna, Paris, and Cologne, Düsseldorf, Germany. I've had a lot of experience hanging out with art students and seeing how art academies work. I've had institutional affiliations with several art academies in the world, and there's kind of a the way that young artists are brought into the art world as young artists, I find relatively dangerous. And I think there's a lot of false promises that are given. And I'm also afraid that there's a lot of young people who think, oh, I want to be rich and famous, I'll become an artist. And that's a horrible idea, by the way. And I think part of that is because a lot of young artists end up studying with professors who are already rich and famous artists, and they see the professors, they see their lifestyles, and they see how relaxed they are, and they think, I could do that. I'll just try that. And I don't think it's like that. And I think the sustaining in our practice is really one of those things I'm very proud of, just having been able to sustain in our practice for, say, 12 years outside of the academy. So I'm no longer studying, and I'm considering myself on a daily basis a practicing artist, and that's my thing. And I'm giving up more and more of what I would like to have as comforting things in order to be able to say that on a daily basis. So I'm getting to the point where there's not too much more I'm willing to give up. But it's difficult, and I think it's also something that artists don't really talk about. It's also not taught, but, it's not taught. It is something that artists talk about. I think I had a chance in the catalog to write 10 lines, and I took that as my chance to explain to the world what I'm seeing from my position right here, which is that when artists talk with other artists, they talk a lot about work, and they don't talk about the artworks they're making. They talk about how did you get a studio, how much did it cost, how are you handling this, where did you move, what about this residency, did you do this grant thing? And outside of the academy, critique still plays a role, but most of the artists that I know are just assuming that the artists they're talking to are making work and taking it seriously, and that the more important pressing issue is how are you getting by, And so that's. I forget if is that a question or yeah. I think it's a very interesting thing. I'm not purporting to know the theories of Leibniz at all, but I read a description of his monad theory once as saying that every particle in the universe is actually just a little tiny mirror reflecting the entire universe from its perspective. And I think of that also, might not be right. Leibniz, as a German
Leibniz,
mathematician. But it might not be correct. I read it somewhere. But I like that idea of thinking of artists, of anybody that way, you know? And art works that way as well. And if I have a difficult time getting to know somebody or engaging in an artwork, I'd take that step back and try to imagine what universe it's reflecting from its literally particular standpoint. Yeah, and that necessarily through apparatus. Yeah.
May I ask what was
With the microphone.
best? So, different cities in Europe brought different experiences. What was the best one for you, or where did you get the most?
It's really. I'm gonna walk around that question, but no, I'm gonna tell you way more than you want to know. Here's the other thing: is I'm a born American, which means I'm actually kind of a genetic capitalist. It's something I learned. It's something I learned. It's something they teach us in kindergarten. You can't turn it off. There's something inside of me here. I can't ever not. I can't take those glasses off, so to speak. And then I moved to Vienna, and the Austrians are going to hate me for. No, the Austrians are going to hate me for this, but the Austrians are very morbid, and the Viennese are very morbid, and I love Viennese morbidity. I made a film about this, and Viennese morbidity, yeah. And morbidity is not a bad thing, by the way. Morbidity, the Viennese form of morbidity is a really beautiful, kind of relaxed way of accepting that this life is a beautiful thing that we have. So, for instance, this June 9th, 2017. From 13 to 14 o'clock, you all have chosen to share it with me, and that's a very meaningful thing to me. You don't get another June 9th, 2017 from 13 to 14 o'clock. You don't. I don't either. Yeah, I'm sorry. But you got free food, and the coffee's coming. Yeah. And so that's like, I understand that through the eyes of morbidity, kind of, you know, accepting the beauty of that. You can also call that natality, like natal, like the fact that we're born. If you're looking at the end of it or the beginning of it, it's the same chord, you know. In France, existentialism is kind of I feel like between the capitalist, existentialist, morbid, and then in Germany, I can never use the word socialism, but there's a way of collective thinking that is shocking to an American. There's a use of the pronoun we that just doesn't occur in the U.S. In the U.S., it's all I. And it's very hard for an American. I'm sorry, I'm getting myself in trouble here, but I find it's very difficult for a lot of Americans to think in terms of we. And by the way, just as a quick aside, in German, if I don't know you, or if let's say we met before, but I can't remember if we're using the polite form, Sie, or the impersonal form du, a clever way around that is for me to say, we met before, didn't we? And then you say, yes, we did. And I say, where were we? And we could talk for an hour and always say we. And in that sense, if we're formal or if we're polite, we're both on the same level, and we've accepted that. And that's just built into the language. American English doesn't have that built into the language. I immediately have to, you know, say I and you. Sorry? It's you. It's you, but I mean, anyway, I'm just saying that there's these things that are actually like architectural language apparatus that we see the world through that change the way you see the world. And so I'm really schizophrenic now also, is because being a capitalist, morbid, socialist, existentialist is also kind of that, like I don't think there's any place in the world where I really do feel comfortable now. And also there's this question of where you live. I feel like I live in an airplane. I feel like I live in train stations, and I live here, I mean, there must be a lot of people on the planet right now that spend more than half the year traveling, you know? In which case, traveling is where they live. And because there's this constant question, where are you from, where do you live? And it's for state reasons as well. You know, if I want to get a visa in Germany, I have to live there for more than half the year. I can't live somewhere else. But yeah, they're all beautiful places. I mean, they're all beautiful people. And the thing about language too, I'm very proud of my German, and I'm very proud of my French, which is not as good as my German. And I didn't learn French or German because I wanted to read French or German philosophy, which is a very good reason to learn French and German. I read it because I wanted to talk to people in French and German, in bars and on the street. And everywhere you go, it's a little bit, how do you find what you don't know you're looking for? How do you find people you don't know you're looking for, you know? I often say this metaphor too, the parties that you've gone to in your life that were the best parties you ever went to, they were not the parties that had the smartest people at them, or the most beautiful people at them, or the richest people, or any one kind of person. They were the parties that you went to that had a strange amalgamation of some joker clown and some liar and some princess and it was just one particular configuration that night made sense and changed you, you know? And you can't say I'm gonna have a party, an artist can't say I'm gonna make an artwork, or a curator can't say I'm gonna make an exhibition that's gonna have one exact result. But by trying the different configurations, things come up, things show up that you cannot possibly have thought of in advance, you know? Does that make any sense?
Yes.
I just wanted to comment on the notion of the we and the I you just mentioned, and I'm really surprised that you're saying that the Americans are not the we type people, as we assume that the American melting pot is the kind of from history kind of mentality, thinking in a more kind of we context, and there's actually in Germany a current movement which we call the WeQ movement, in opposition to the IQ, like the intelligence quotient versus the we are quotient exactly. And there's a big actually quite a few publications on that as well, about this kind of thinking beyond the silos, thinking jointly to, for example, innovate, to think further, to develop future strategies, and that thinking in a we is a lot more productive than just by yourself. And as you were saying as well, like those parties with these mixed people from different backgrounds were a lot more enjoyable than if it's just very homogeneous in this one direction only. And I was just wondering, can you agree on that, living in Germany and with that kind of development, that it's getting even stronger in this kind of WeQ spirit?
Yeah, I applied for I choose to live in Germany. I'm enjoying my life in Germany. I love being an artist in Germany. I'm probably actually an adult German artist, which is strange because I've living there for 10 years and have kind of gone through this chapter of adulthood to the point where, this conversation is all getting very personal, by the way. I went back to the U.S. I went back to the U.S. last summer for 2 months and had culture shock for the first time in my life. But I'm not used to cars, and I'm not used to there's just a lot of things that I'm no longer used to, and sometimes I can't tell if I'm speaking German or English to somebody. I think the switches as well. But I also want to let you know that I do not think, I think it's important to try and stay as abreast of politics as I can and to be as active as I can, but I'm not, I don't want to go on the record here of, having said, US, France, Austria, Germany, I'm there, I'm in no position to even speak on behalf of the Americans, let alone the Germans, so I'm not going to, I can't. But there's a lot of things I've discovered which I cannot undiscover, having lived in these different countries. And I think that's a great reason to travel, but it's also irrecoverable. I can't ever go back to being the way I was before I made those discoveries, So you can only do so many of those before the machine is totally no longer operable. So I'm trying to make those decisions carefully now. But yeah, I love my life in Germany, and I live there intentionally.
Ich wollte eigentlich auf
Klar.
Deutsch was fragen. Ich verstehe zwar Englisch, aber...
Nee, bitte.
Nein, weil eben, es ist interessant, dieses Mix-up...
Trotzdem mit Mikro. Ja.
Gleich, oder?
Nee, kannst
No,
mach das, die müssen das aufnehmen. Ich kann es übersetzen, genau.
Soll ich wo? Hier?
Nee, es geht schon.
Es geht schon.
Ja, einfach wie ein Eis.
Mehr
Perfekt.
herhalten. Ja, diese Vielfalt, nicht? In die Sprachen schon und diese Bereicherung eigentlich und doch nirgends daheim sein. Das finde ich sehr interessant. Also noch mal zurück zu deiner Arbeit. Darf ich du
Klar,
sagen?
bitte sehr, bitte sehr.
Weil das Diskurs war
Ja.
von Sie oder du in Deutschland. Ja, interessant eigentlich. Ich habe gemerkt, du hast nicht Zeit gehabt zum Essen.
Das ist okay. Ja.
Leider.
Stimmt, aber es ist ein bisschen unhöflich, wenn ich esse, aber bitte.
Na, bitte ess weiter. Nee, wenn ich gekommen bin zu diesem Tisch, habe ich deine Arbeiten nicht gekannt, habe ich schnell gelesen. Das war alles nur Zufall, weil ich geguckt habe und dann habe ich gelesen vom schwarzen Punkt oder Loch, das habe ich gleich hier in ein Buch gelesen und das hat mich sehr erinnert, also dass alles auf sich zurückzieht, also die schwarzen Löcher in der Sphäre.
Astrophysik, ja.
Ja. Und aber der weiße Punkt existiert nur, wenn weiß herum ist und von dort entfaltet sich alles. Also, und es ist auch in der Meditation, wenn wir unsere Gedanken zur Ruhe bringen oder still werden, dann kann wieder was Neues geschehen. Und wenn das in der Kunst reinkommt, dann hat man vielleicht nicht mehr dieses Bedürfnis, was für die anderen zu kreieren oder Geld damit zu verdienen, was leichter gesagt ist als getan, weil man muss ja damit leben oder das ist so schwer. Wie machst du das, dass du das irgendwie überlebst, oder wie soll ich denn sagen, also das auf einen Level bringst, dass du so arbeiten kannst, wie du möchtest, ohne dich zu verkaufen in diesem Sinne.
Yeah. Quick translation. Thank you very much. She hasn't seen my work, which is, by the way, not a problem whatsoever. And I also think it's really great the moment when you meet another artist and you don't know what they make, but you kind of connect as artists. So you haven't yet been forced into the position of thinking, I like it or I don't like it. There's this great open moment where artists, just as sort of tradespeople who work together, are partners in crime. And then the question about the black hole, but also a question about how one survives as an artist and how to try and, if one needs money and one wants to make artwork, what is the space in between those two problems? It's a very good question, and one of the parts of that question too is that I look at a lot of the work I make. Is it okay wenn ich auf Englisch antworte? Sorry. I look at a lot of the work I make, and most of the works that I make cost less than $100 or €100, often less than €20. And of course, I'm talking about a 16 millimeter film here that played for 6 months. That's a different issue. But even then, the original film itself, when I made it, cost me less than $200 to make. And so part of that is, part of also for me sustaining an ethical practice is making sure that I can live within my means to a certain extent. So I see some artworks here, for instance, or in the world, where I think that artist made a piece that costs €100,000 to make that piece, without knowing if it was the right piece or the wrong piece or a good piece or a bad piece. And I can't do that. The part of the US I'm from, Vermont, which is up here near the Canadian border, we're what you call flinty. We're very sparsam. And so mein bester Kumpel in Deutschland kommt aus ehemaliger DDR. Und ich finde auch diese DDR, so former East Germany and New England for me has a kind of similar flintiness. But anyway, so as a result, I think I'd be incapable of making. I don't think those work. I don't think I can conceptualize a work that would cost more than a certain amount of money. I don't see it as something that's necessary for me. So that's one way that I try to keep that in balance, or I don't even try to keep it in balance. Those works don't even occur to me, I guess. And otherwise, it's tricky. I mean, in terms of privilege, I do have a gallery, and I've been working with a gallery for the last 5 years. That said, I shouldn't be saying this in public, but I'm not a very popular artist. I'm not the kind. I mean, I don't think so. I mean, let me put it this way: I don't think the works that I make are. I don't know. It all sounds like silly luxury problems, but they're not. It's very difficult also once you get in that position to think, am I making a work? And while making a work, am I thinking this is something that somebody might translate into get money? And that thought is a very scary thought. Yeah. That said, I've had people actually buy works of mine, people I haven't known, and people who I can assure you are not buying works of mine because they think it's an investment. I assure you. And that is actually a really beautiful feeling. I have to remind everybody that capitalism is separate from trade. Trade is a beautiful thing, and without trade, we wouldn't have made it as humans to be what we are. I think exchanging goods and being like, you have this, I have this, let's do this, and the idea that when somebody says, I want that thing that he made, and I don't care who he is, I don't want to meet him, I don't want to hang out with him, this isn't going to be worth any money, I need to have it, and being part of that. And being able to think that I can participate in generating that, it's a rush. It's like an incredible feeling. It's kind of a feeling of mystical joy, not because it's related to money. I've had an artwork stolen from a show. I know. It's like, I would have given it to them if they asked me, but die haben es geklaut, eine Kunstarbeit von mir. But I thought it was great. Yeah, sorry, aber das war eine große Ehre, weil für mich schon. Because that means they didn't even go through the front door and just say, can I have that? Can I have a copy of that? Can I give you something for that? They just had to have it. And I can't tell you why, but that didn't hurt my feelings at all. I was honored. That was to make it to that level. So by the way, I'm still looking for it. It's a photograph. It's about this big. Whoever's out there. No, just kidding. But it is a tricky. It's always very, very tricky. I had a conversation. I heard a conversation. I wish I had had this conversation. I heard a conversation between two artists, and one artist said to the other artist, "I have to make money. I have to become successful. I have to become rich and famous as an artist." And the other artist said, "Why?" And the first artist said, "Because if I don't become a rich and famous and successful artist, I lose." And the other artist said, "Well, what do you lose?" And the conversation went on and on and on until eventually the artist asked other artist, "What is the worst possible thing that can happen to you?" This is also in terms of privilege. And the artist said, "Well, the worst thing that they could imagine at that moment was they would have to move back in with their parents and move in the basement and live with their parents for the rest of their life," which is obviously not as bad as it can be. And the other artist said, "What kind of artwork will you make then?" Which I wish it had been me, but that's like you can take all those other things away, and that's just sort of the pervasive question. I'm curious as to see what the basement artwork looks like, because there's no reason why that would turn off, like why that would stop, you know. And so I think it's really important, and I blame academies a lot for this. I think it's really important that young artists find a way to divorce those two. That imperative to make and be part of this community, which it sometimes is in various guises and forms, and that entire art world, which has very little to do with artists. It's not the artist world, so to speak. Jokes?
But how do you make a living? Because if you don't move back to your parents' basement,
Yeah, I mean,
somehow, okay, of course, saying I want to make money is not the point, but you still have to make a living.
yeah.
That's. I was always curious, especially we had an open table with Sebastian Diaz Morales, who's a video maker.
I like his
also.
work, yeah.
And I always ask myself, how do you make a living, especially when you're a young video maker? It's not like paintings or photography. You can sell a certain number. Can you make a living?
I mean, by the way, just for the record, the art world doesn't really. I mean, nowadays, if you say this is unsaleable, that's the art world's like.
Wow.
That's not necessarily an issue. It's also a very personal question. Maybe it's because I'm also a genetic capitalist American, but I feel like if I asked you how you made a living, it would maybe make you feel a little uncomfortable. The truth is I live in my studio in Dusseldorf. I pay €250 a month rent, and there's a shower there. I don't have a car. I take public transportation. I shop at Aldi. Yeah, Aldi ist nicht schlecht, ne? Bio.
The question is who's living.
Right. I mean.
When you say how do you make a living, it's like it might not be your living, but it
No,
might be your
yeah.
living, or like my living, or like these ideas of how much you need in order to survive is so dependent on someone, the individual.
And there's something that's very good.
True, yeah.
There's something about this is the existentialist morbidity part of me too. Is that what is it? How much can you take away before someone dies? Like you do need this Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but realistically, if you didn't have a place to stay, you'd probably go stay with friends. You know, if you didn't have food, there's a social service nearby that would probably give it to you. You would steal it or something. You know, but I can tell you that as in my world, I've given up a lot of the extraneous things, and so I have some equipment I can make work with. And I don't expect any more than that. I don't think I'll ever have a car. I don't think when people have pets, I always think, wow, you have a dog. Your dog probably eats more than I do, and is better than I do. You know? I have a plant, and my plant I think is so yeah, Götterblatt, sehr schön. I have one plant, and I focus my attention on that when I can, and I think she's doing fine. But that's a personal decision, you know. So it's a very personal thing. I'm not telling you it was a good idea, and I'm not telling you that it's ever going to get better. But here's the thing: it doesn't bother me if it doesn't. If the day I die, I'm in the exact same situation as I am right now, I will not have lived an unsuccessful human life. There's nobody that can say that to me. And so that's another thing, is that in terms of the monad and everyone being a reflection of the universe, I'm not signing on to a lot of things that people sign on to as being necessary. So. And the more and more I get rid of that stuff, the more and more I feel like I am who I am, and the less apologetic I get about it as I get older as well. But you do have to live. But I also, I don't want to come back and bang on the academies, but there's not a lot of pathways offered to young artists. There's not a lot of young artists that see that. And I think it's an important thing. It's not, I'm not embarrassed about it, but I wouldn't say I'm proud of it either. You know?
Thank you. Really.
Yeah, how about a joke? I don't want to end on that. By the way, in my lease it says that I'm not allowed to live in my studio. I just said that on the internet, so if I might be coming knocking on your door next month.
Okay.
So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So if
Okay, now we're off the internet.